our running culture, it's doctors and engineers, but same thing. There's no concept of social entrepreneurs. What is Skoll doing? What do you think we can do to help tell that story better so that social entrepreneurs become our new heroes?
Well, it's a great question. I think, I don't know about you, but I grew up reading biographies about, Dolly Madison and Florence Nightingale and these great people who made, a real contribution to their world. So I think kids are really, and everybody's hungry for these kinds of stories. We hear so much that's so dispiriting and overwhelming. And it's actually my theory that one of the reasons An Inconvenient Truth was so successful, Jeff would totally agree with this, was not because the graphs and slides, and we all know Al Gore is, he's scientifically extremely literate. He's updating that presentation every day as new data comes in from ice samples and from the IPCC and every place else. But it was the story of a man who summoned up the courage following this huge defeat and disappointment to go onto the world stage with a cause to which he was deeply committed and really find a platform for global leadership that is, I think, absolutely remarkable. So that's one story of a social entrepreneur there, and I would argue that Al Gore is actually a pretty significant social entrepreneur. That's testimony to the power of these stories. We do films every year. We do 3 or 4 films in a series we call our Uncommon Heroes series. We have a tagline that is Uncommon Heroes, Common Good, because that's what social entrepreneurs are. They're these uncommon heroes dedicated to the common good. They're uncommon because they're, for the most part, fairly ordinary people who identify not just an injustice or something that's wrong, but they see the opportunity, and they go after that opportunity with all the zeal of an entrepreneur to shift what we call an equilibrium. Equilibrium is a status quo. They want to make the difference in that status quo so that this is no longer a problem. They're just extraordinary. So the work we do in telling their stories with short films actually translates into all kinds of benefits. We show these films every year in our awards ceremony at Oxford, where we convene the Skoll World Forum every year, bringing together social entrepreneurs and their allies and champions and media folks and academics from all over the world, from 60+ countries. Those films are always, they just bring the house down. People love to hear these stories of people who are pursuing this opportunity with a passion that is really just so moving. Very, very powerful. A little story about a recent success. We did one of these 7-minute films last year at the Skoll World Forum on Willie Foote, who's the founder of an organization called Root Capital. Root Capital focuses on what it calls the missing middle. Probably most of you have heard of the sort of challenge of the small and medium-sized enterprise between, the big corporation and the micro enterprise. There's this missing middle, which is the small and medium-sized enterprise in the developing world. There were folks from Starbucks at the forum last year. They saw this film about the work Willie was doing with coffee growers in Latin America, and they liked the film so much they invested $2 million in Root Capital, and they're now screening this film at Starbucks all over the country. So it's a nice story of the power of media to affect that kind of consciousness and get rolled out so more people can see it.
You talked about Inconvenient Truth. I learned recently that there's quite a robust organization that was in place to capture the enthusiasm that people experience after watching the movie. Can you tell us about that? How was Skoll involved in that? And which parts of that helped, which parts of that were not that useful?
Well, that's really, I can't talk as much about that because Participant Media, which is our sister organization, is responsible for An Inconvenient Truth and for what it calls the social action campaigns that really leverage the impact of these film productions. But I can tell you there was a Train the Trainers program. So before there was An Inconvenient Truth, there was Al Gore and his slideshow going everywhere he could, whether it was, Davos or Google or, or a Kiwanis Club meeting in the U.S. He was really constrained by what he was humanly capable of. So came up with this idea of training the trainers and getting all kinds of people to be trained to deliver that presentation. And I believe there are more than 1,000 trainers out there now who are expanding and building upon the inflection point really that An Inconvenient Truth created.
You mentioned the family office piece also briefly. As we think about our own investing, what do you think we can learn from the thoughts that's gone into his family office?
Yeah, well, I'd be the last one to say we've got it nailed. In fact, most of our investments are invested as most family offices would invest them in various funds with various fund managers. But there is also a direct investment asset in the portfolio, and that's where some really interesting work is being done, where there are investments in clean tech. We have, for example, investments in Tesla and in Think, which was which bought the early Ford electric car technology. One of the big successful investments was in vitamin water. Most of you know the vitamin water product. You know this story? Yeah.
No, but it's everywhere, so.
I know, it's ubiquitous, but in the early days it was founded by a fellow whose first name is Darius. I don't remember his last name, but
Iranian.
Is he?
He is Iranian.
Well, he's quite an entrepreneur. It's okay. Well, you know his last name then. Do you know?
I haven't written it down because I just found out that he's Iranian.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a good one for you to track down. But he wanted to come up with another product really to challenge Coke and the high sugar drinks. And there's a lot of concern about obesity and getting people hooked on Coke in the developing world, this, that, and the other. And so Darius came up with this vitamin water, and he sold it to Tata in India, and then Tata sold it to Coke, and it was like a 100x multiple, and Coke will tell you it's one of its best performing products. So that's it's a social enterprise. Well, it's a social enterprise on steroids because, of course, it was so successful. But for me, that's a good example of how you can identify some double bottom line investments that do have the potential to scale big. Now, most of you are probably investors, and this is relatively rare, that kind of multiple. But in the Skoll portfolio, there are investments in solar technology, there are investments in clean tech, there are investments in senior housing, there are all kinds of direct investments in the entrepreneurs who've identified, again, great opportunities to create double value, not just a financial return. So, that's where that's where I think the real future lies, because someone told me the other day, and I he's right, of course, that philanthropic capital is like 0.3 or 0.03% of global GDP. So the most it can be is a catalyst, a spark, shine a light on something. But the force of capitalism is a juggernaut, and entrepreneurship is a juggernaut. And I believe that there is really a generation of young people. We see them, they're flocking to business school programs all over the world, absolutely convinced that you've got to create businesses that do business differently, that don't disregard the social and environmental impacts of their ventures. that do their best to do no harm, but ideally are trying to